Gopi Jana Palapa Girivaradari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjanam Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjanam Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjanam Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani Ki Jai, Gonitai Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning. We're reading from Canto 11, Chapter 4, and the text today is Text 11. Uttrit Trikala Guna Manuta Java Shaishnan Asmanapara Jala Din Atitriya Kechit Krodasya Yanti Vipalasya Vashampade Gor Majanti Dushchara Tapascha Vritot Srijanti Utritri Kala Guna Maruta Jaiva Shaishnan Asmanapara Jaladin Atitriya Kechit Krodasya Yanti Vipalasya Vashampade Gor Maijanti Dushchara Tapascha Vrito Srijanti Utritri Kala Guna Maruta Jaiva Shaishnan Asmanapara Jaladin Atitriya Kechit Krodasya Yanti Vipalasya Vashampade Gor Maijanti Dushchara Tapascha Vritotrijanti Please chant. Utritri Kala Guna Maruta Jaiva Shaishnan Asmanapara Jaladin Atitriya Kechit Krodasya Yanti Vipalasya Vashampade Gor Majanti Dushchara Tapascha Vritoshjanti Utritri Kala Guna Maruta Jaiva Shaishnan Asmanapara Jaladin Atitriya Kechit Krodasya Yanti Vipalasya Vashampade Gor Majanti Dushchara Tapascha Vrihotshajanti Uttitri Kalaguna Maruta Jaiva Shaishnan Asman Napara Jaladin Atitri Akeshit Krodasya Yanti Vipalasya Vasham Padekor Maijanti Dushchara Tapasya Vrihotra Janti. Thank you very much for chanting. The word for translation, and this is the disciples of Srila Prabhupada doing the translation and the purport. Shut, hunger. Trit, thirst. Trikala guna, the manifestations of the three phases of time, such as heat and cold, rain, and so on. Maruta, wind. Jaiva, enjoyment of the tongue. Shaishnan, and of the genitals. Asman, ourselves, in all these forms. Apara, limitless. Jaladin, oceans. Atitriya, having crossed over. Kechit, some persons. Krodasya, of anger. Yanti, they come. Vipalasya, which is fruitless. Vasham, under the sway. Pade, in the footprint. Go, of a cow. Majanti, they drown. Dushchara, difficult to execute. Tapa, their austerities. Cha, and. Vrita, without any good purpose. Ushajanti, they throw away. And this is the translation for this text 11. Some men practice severe penances to cross beyond our influence, which is like an immeasurable ocean with endless waves of hunger, thirst, heat, cold, and the other conditions brought about by the passing of time, such as the sensuous wind and the urges of the tongue and sex organs. Nevertheless, although crossing this ocean of sense gratification through severe penances, such persons foolishly drown in a cow's hoofprint, when conquered by useless anger. Thus, they exhaust the benefit of their difficult austerities in vain. Purport. Those who do not accept the devotional service of the Supreme Lord can be considered in two categories. Those engaged in sense gratification are easily conquered by the demigods through various weapons such as hunger, thirst, sexual desire, lamentation for the past, and vain hoping for the future. Such materialistic fools, infatuated with the material world, are easily controlled by the demigods, who are the ultimate supplying agents of sense gratification. But according to Sridhar Swami, persons who attempt to subdue the desires of the material senses and thus avoid the control of the demigods without surrendering to the Supreme Lord are even more foolish than the sense gratifiers. Although crossing the ocean of sense gratification, those who perform severe penances without service to the Lord eventually drown in tiny puddles of anger. One who simply performs material penances does not actually purify his heart. By one's material determination, one may restrict the activities of the senses, although one's heart is still filled with material desires. The practical result of this is krodha, or anger. We have seen artificial performers of penance who have become very bitter and angry through denial of the senses. Being indifferent to the Supreme Lord, such persons do not achieve ultimate liberation, nor can they enjoy material sense gratification. Rather, they become angry, and through cursing others or enjoying false pride, they uselessly exhaust the results of their painful austerities. It is understood that when a yogi curses, he diminishes the mystic power he has accumulated. Thus, anger gives neither liberation nor material sense gratification, but merely burns up all the results of material penances and austerities. Being useless, such anger is compared to a useless puddle found in a cow's hoofprint. Thus, after crossing over the ocean of sense gratification, the great yogis who are indifferent to the Supreme Lord drown in puddles of anger. Although the demigods admit that the devotees of the Lord actually conquer the miseries of material life, it is understood here that a similar result is not to be obtained by so-called yogis who are not interested in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Om Jnana-Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shiyuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatan Sagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Shah. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostite Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhye Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimata Romapada Swami Iti Namine Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Sunyavadi Pashcha Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'll read the translation once again. It is a little long. Some men practice severe penances to cross beyond our influence. So this is the demigods or the devatas talking, which is like an immeasurable ocean with endless waves of hunger, thirst, heat, cold, and the other conditions brought about by the passing of time, such as the sensuous wind and the urges of the tongue and sex organs. Nevertheless, although crossing this ocean of sense gratification through severe penances, such persons foolishly drown in a cow's hoofprint when conquered by useless anger. Thus they exhaust the benefit of their difficult austerities in vain. So just to paint the picture, so Cupid with his associates is at the kingdom of Narayan Rishi, and that's Badrik Ashram, having been sent by Indra, so one of the demigods. So the reason for Indra having dispatched the latter, meaning Cupid and his associates, is that he was fearful that when Narayan Rishi, who was clearly appeared to be threatening, he would seize his kingdom. This was the concern and the reason that Cupid and his associates were sent by Lord Indra. So there's an explanation of how Cupid went about trying to subvert the assumed purpose of the Lord. So this is the description. Cupid, not knowing the power of the Lord, released arrows of glances from beautiful women, along with the charming breezes of spring. So something that's going to disturb the senses, supposedly, of Narayan Rishi. Glances of beautiful woman and a very charming breeze, spring-like breeze. So the response of Lord Narayan Rishi was to say, this is his response with being exposed to the supposed stimulation of his senses. Do not fear, O mighty Cupid, O wind god and wives of the devotees, please accept this gift I am offering you and kindly sanctify my hermitage by your presence. So the response on the part of Narayan Rishi was to offer articles of worship to the guests, so proper reception of the guests. So irrespective of what clearly their motive was, that was ignored, and he proceeded with proper decorum to offer articles of worship to his guests. So Narayan Rishi, he understood the offense committed by Indra. He understood it right away. Cupid and his followers, on the other hand, they began to tremble before Narayan Rishi. And upon his offering these items of worship to his guests, they bowed their heads in shame. So, you've come with an ill intention to somebody's place of residence, and the person is treating you extremely well and with great respect, and you actually are bringing disrespectful intentions. So upon being offered these items of worship, they bowed their heads in shame. And in text 9, 2 texts before, there's Drumila, because this whole narration is by Drumila to King Nimi. He explains that they spoke to the Lord to invoke his compassion. So now, there's been a change of strategy because there's a new understanding. There's a sense of shame. So now they start speaking in order to try and invoke Narayan Rishi's compassion. So in today's text, so there were 2 prior to this, so it's all trying to invoke compassion for their position. The devotees speak the following. So of course this is after they've committed the offense, they're trying to invoke compassion. And Srila Vishwanath gives their words in this way. So here's our great Acharya commenting. And he says, this is how they spoke to Narayan Rishi. Those who perform austerities but do not worship you have 2 destinations. They become controlled by us, meaning the devotees, or by anger. Under our control, they pursue enjoyment of their desires. So the category of persons that are pursuing austerities without worshipping the Supreme Lord are under the control of the devotees. So the devotees here are explaining that this brings those persons under their control, the fact that they are not making worship of the Supreme Lord the focus in their performance of austerity. I remember quite a few years back, there was many persons passed through the temple, and sometimes for brief periods of time, and one gets exposed to what are their motivations for coming to the temple. And I remember being exposed to somebody who would come, just like many persons come on Sunday in appreciation of the deities, and then work, because we live in such a global economy, the work situation took the husband to a different country, and anyway, there were all sorts of difficulties that came into this person's life, and the person expressed through some communication that the entire family was asking, but you perform so many austerities, why do you have all these difficulties? And what I understood was the person at no point made those austerities have as their focus worship of the Supreme Lord. It was, for betterment of their own life, supposedly. So if one examines this statement, one can reference Lord Kapila, because this is a statement that the devotees are making to Naranarayan Rishi, that in fact, persons who don't worship you, they come under our control. And here's Lord Kapila Dev. So it's another incarnation of the Supreme Lord, where he explains a similar point. And this is how he puts it. The senses are symbolic representations of the demigods, and their natural inclination is to work under the direction of the Vedic injunctions. As the senses are representative of the demigods, so the mind is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Lord Kapila's statement comes in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So the critical factor is that the senses of living entities are always engaged in some occupation, either in activities prescribed in the injunctions of the Vedas, some austerities, or in material activities. So no regard of Vedic injunctions. So those are the two ways or directions that the senses can be utilized, but they always have to have some occupation. And the mind, however, so that's above the senses, or you can say it coordinates the activities of the senses, is the leader of the senses. And Srila Prabhupada states, in a very similar manner, that the mind, being the center of the senses, the supreme, in the same way that the mind is the center of the senses, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the leader of all the demigods who are engaged in activities of this material world. So, you have the two leaders. The mind is the leader of the senses. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the leader of all the demigods, such as the sun god, the moon god, Lord Indra, and others. So in fact, the demigods are different limbs of the universal body of the Supreme Lord. And the senses are indeed controlled by different demigods. I mean, that was the statement of Lord Kapila Dev, that they are in fact symbolic representations of the demigods. So, in addition, the mind is the representation of the Supreme Lord. So the fact that the demigods tell Lord Naranarayan that those using their senses, led by the mind, are acting under their influence is correct. It is completely correct, this statement. And they particularly point out, as an act of subservience to Naranarayan Rishi, because they're still trying to smooth out the difficulty that's arisen for them, that those who perform some activity with the senses or restrain those senses they do not aim, and who do not aim that service at the Supreme Lord, Narayan Rishi, have those senses act under their influence. So they're expressing a truth. Of course, it's known to Narayan Rishi, but it's a means of acknowledging somebody and the greatness of the personality, and this is what they're trying to do. So they're stating a fact, but it's also acknowledging their role and the role of Narayan Rishi. And Srila Prabhupada puts it this way: when the service is ultimately aimed at the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the senses are in their natural position. So the devotees give a second destination, as they call it, for persons who do not worship the Supreme Lord or have him as the goal for their activities. Srila Vishwanath gives the idea of the devotees. He has the second idea that they're expressing. Some persons surpass us, meaning the devotees, who are like a limitless ocean, bestowing hunger, thirst, heat, cold, and rain arising from the qualities of past, present, and future, and as well the wind of Malaya hills, which gives pleasure to the skin and bestowing pleasure of the tongue and genitals. But they drown in the water of a cow's hoof print, just as a person who's drowning and out of control gives up a treasure he has placed on his head. They destroy their difficult austerities by cursing in anger, and thus that austerity becomes useless for liberation or enjoyment. So what could you say, a miserable end, so to speak, for somebody who's actually trying to control their senses, isn't utilizing the leader of the senses, meaning the mind, to actually make Lord Krishna the focus, or at least even an incarnation of Lord Krishna, the focus of their austerities. They do come under the control of the demigods. So there they are performing their austerities. The demigods send forth heat, cold, rain, and even like they tried to do in the case of Narayan Rishi, what they called the wind of Malaya hills, which gives pleasure to the skin. So the result for persons who are performing austerities is in this way is that they actually destroy any positive result that could come from the austerities, because they actually become angry. They're experiencing all this hardship. There isn't some shelter that they have while they're performing this hardship, and the demigods are subjecting them to the hardship. So the result is that they actually, in their anger, end up cursing someone. And because of that, all the austerities become completely useless. So in fact, there's no liberation, there's not even enjoyment that follows all those austerities. So Lord Krishna lists austerities as a Brahminical trait. So this is how Lord Krishna puts it: peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. These are the natural qualities by which the Brahmanas work. So, and that's Bhagavad Gita 18:42. Samo dhammas tapaso cham shantir arjavam evacha Gyanam Vijnanam Sikayam Brahma Karma Svabhava Yam. He draws attention to the performance of austerity which lack faith in the Supreme Lord and discredits that austerity. So anything done as sacrifice, charity, or penance without faith in the Supreme, O son of Pritha, is impermanent. It is called sat and is useless both as in this life and the next life. So that's Lord Krishna looking at the performance of austerity which lacks faith in him. And he's discrediting that austerity completely. Calls it impermanent, useless, both in this life and the next life. So, quite strong. I'm always a little afraid to read the Sanskrit verses because the computer always changes it, and I don't know all of them. So, but that was Bhagavad Gita 17:28. Ashradaya hutam datam tapas taptam kritam chayat asatiti uchate parta nachatat. Computer changed that one word. No ime. Sorry. Once again, the activity of the senses requires a transcendental objective. Be it usage of the senses in sacrifice, charity, or penance. It requires having a transcendental objective. And Srila Prabhupada states it this way: everything should be done for the Supreme in Krishna consciousness. Without such fruit and without the proper guidance, there can never be any fruit. So, Srila Prabhupada makes a generalization even regarding Vedic injunctions. This is how Srila Prabhupada puts it. Because the devotees are talking about persons who may be following Vedic injunctions, they're trying to perform austerities, and here's how Srila Prabhupada puts it. In all the Vedic scriptures, faith in the Supreme is advised. In the pursuit of all Vedic instructions, the ultimate goal is the understanding of Krishna. No one can obtain success without following this principle. So it's clear, no one can attain success without following this principle of actually having faith in the Supreme. So, since the devotees are, and this has been recounted by Durmila to King Nimi, are giving the destination for a category of persons performing austerity without a motive, that it is to be for the Supreme Lord, the result being anger, we can note that Srila Prabhupada draws attention to the tendency of persons who are in a conditioned state, because everyone's in a conditioned state. People in the conditioned state are attracted to worshipping demigods, ghosts or yakshas like Kuvera. In text 11, today's text, the devotees are trying to elicit compassion for the Supreme Lord and are in fact drawing attention to this important point. So everything they're saying is completely in line with the scriptures. And they're understanding that people are, in their conditioned state, are attracted to worshipping demigods. So even though the mode of goodness is better than the mode of ignorance or passion, one who takes directly to Krishna consciousness is transcendental to all three modes of material nature. The point of the devotees is that the person performing austerity, not having taken the Supreme Lord as the ultimate beneficiary of that austerity, can become subject to anger, and so will destroy any benefit of that austerity. So this is indeed in accord with the teaching of the Supreme Lord, because here's what Lord Krishna says, it's Bhagavad Gita 5:29. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So it like encapsulates, Lord Krishna's statement encapsulates how just having this understanding of him being the ultimate beneficiary for sacrifices and austerities actually brings one peace from all the kinds of material miseries. So those persons we heard, the demigods are deliberately bringing heat, cold, rain, some stimulation for their tongue or their genitals. They've been subjected to it. So it's really fighting a great onslaught without that shelter of having Lord Krishna as the beneficiary of the austerity being performed. So it's only in that way, having that proper understanding of him being the beneficiary, that one can become peaceful from all these material miseries. So that's Krishna stating it himself, 529 Bhagavad Gita. And Srila Prabhupada explains that all conditioned souls within, and this is his term, and I think it's so fantastic, I have to use it, the clutches of the illusory energies, you're gripped by the illusory energy, are all anxious to attain peace in this material world. What they do not know is the greatest peace formula. So this is Srila Prabhupada talking. And this is the peace formula. Lord Krishna is the beneficiary in all human activities. That's the peace formula. Srila Prabhupada. And he gives this injunction that accompanies this peace formula, Srila Prabhupada. Men should offer everything to the transcendental service of the Lord because he is the proprietor of all planets and the demigods therein. So there's a very clear injunction given. So this indeed is what Narayan Rishi taught himself. And we read it. It was in text 6. Narayan Rishi taught the devotional service of the Lord by which material work ceases, and he himself perfectly practiced this knowledge. It's given in text 9. He is living even today, his lotus feet served by the greatest of saintly persons. So to emphasize the position of an incarnation of the Lord, Srila Prabhupada states it this way. No one is greater than he, capital letter. He is greater than the greatest of the demigods. Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. The Lord is the master of material nature, and the conditioned souls are under the stringent rules of material nature. Unless one understands these bare facts, it is not possible to achieve peace in this world, either individually or collectively. Lord Krishna is the supreme predominator, and all living entities, including the great demigods, are his subordinates. So it's encapsulated in that statement by Srila Prabhupada. So the devotees have pointed out the category of persons that perform austerities without having the Lord as their objective. And they say that they destroy their difficult austerities by cursing in anger, and thus the austerity becomes useless for liberation or enjoyment. So this is in contrast to one who realizes the object of worship being the Supreme Lord. That person attains the cessation of samsara, repeated birth and death. So satisfying and worshiping the Lord of all beings and the benefactor of all beings is pleasurable in its execution and produces the ultimate happiness for the jiva. So quite a different scenario altogether. And in Western philosophy, there's a question that sometimes gets raised. What counts? What we think or what we do? This is a question that's asked in Western philosophy. So the focus here is on how we're using our thinking, the mind, and it being fixed on the Supreme Lord. He is the beneficiary of my austerity. The person who's situated in samadhi, I quoted this verse from Bhagavad Gita, from the 5th chapter, and Baladev Vijabhusan, he states that the person who's situated in samadhi, so, constantly having this focus on the Supreme Lord, he's actually accomplished a vision of his own Atma, or spirit, and he becomes liberated by worshipping Paramatma. Paramatma is that maintainer and ruler of yagya and tapas. So that was Baladev Vijayabhusan explaining that what it actually leads to when you have this proper focus that the Lord is the objective of one's austerities or charity or penance. And in actual fact, it's the supersoul, Paramatma, that is the maintainer and the ruler of yagya and tapas. So it's quite interesting, just by the devotees acknowledging the position of the Supreme Lord, they are trying to smooth out their mistake, and we're going to come to hear in the next verse tomorrow how he responds to this attempt on their part to elicit his compassion by acknowledging his position. So, which I've tried to elaborate upon in terms of what his position actually is and what the contrast is between the persons they're describing who are performing these austerities without having him as the supreme goal versus those that do. So if there's anything that can expand this discussion, if you'd like to make a contribution, some thought that's arisen as a result of this examination, please feel free.
Thank you for your class, Mataji. I was thinking how, one, the word he is only really applicable to Krishna. So, because it's so easy to think, well, why does this person get everything? Like envy is so easy to, I can only speak for myself, but envy is so easy to come up, like, why does he have to have everything? Everything has to be for his benefit, he. But that's so much easier to think of Prakriti and Purusha when I think of this, my favorite definition of the word Krishna, which is the whole of existence. So I just wanted to share that because since after discovering that, where it says, I was trying to find it where I can maybe read it, where it says, if we analyze the nirukti or semantic derivation of the word Krishna, we find that Na signifies that he stops the repetition of birth and death, and that Krish means satartha, or existence. Krishna is the whole of existence. So just personally for me, it's just so much easier to think, of course, the whole of existence should have everything. So I just thought I'd share.
Thank you very much. It's yes, and to even personalize that even more, when you think that he's the leader of the mind, so you cannot actually allow the mind to go in all kinds of directions. You have to actually bring it back to a focus point. So if one does that, that is what actually aligns the usage of one's senses in the correct way. Because generally that's what the suffering is in the world, that the mind is moving in so many different directions. It's like very uncontrolled. It's called the unbridled mind. So you have to bridle it, just like, you have to bring a horse under control. And that bridling is actually bringing focus to the mind, that the direction one is moving in all one's activities is towards the Supreme Lord. So just adding to your point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji. So in this context, the austerities are being described. The theme of this passage is austerities. Now, I'd like to ask that how much a devotee should perform austerities, because in this passage or Prabhupada purports, it is observed that generally austerities give rise to hard-heartedness, pride, ego. These are the drawbacks of the austerities. And also we understand that in the practice of bhakti process, the nature of austerities are generally leads to this only. This ego arises, pride arises, I am doing so much austerities. So how much austerity a devotee should perform so that he may not be implicated by such drawbacks of pride and ego?
Yeah, that's a very nice question. Well, one thing that struck me very recently when I was reading, I came across that just practicing cleanliness is what brings all the senses under control. So if one thinks of practicing cleanliness as an austerity, because there's some austerity involved, one's very conscious of the state of cleanliness or uncleanliness that may be there. So just striving constantly for complete cleanliness is controlling the senses. So that's automatically aligning with the Supreme Lord, because control of the senses means that it allows for the mind to be better focused. So you brought up the point that, well, how do you actually gauge the amount of austerity or penance or charity? So it's an interesting question, because indeed, you could say that a person perhaps giving a lot of charity could run the risk of becoming prideful. So how do you gauge that borderline that keeps the person in a safe zone versus sliding into some egotistical zone of looking at the charity, as an example, as something that they can gloat about, feel prideful about, see as their contribution, so forgetting the focus. So since this whole verse was very much putting a focus on the deliberate action of the demigods to increase the material miseries of a person performing austerity, penance, or charity, it means that the person who loses the focus that it's for the Supreme Lord is going to be subjected to greater miseries. So the greater misery can indeed take that form of the ego having arisen in a very big way, and the person having to battle their own ego and their own sense of self-importance, which is not a very pleasant condition to have to be wrestling with in the mind. I mean, it requires the intelligence to kick in. So it seems that a very fundamental, simple thing, a Brahminical practice of the austerity of cleanliness can go so far to keep the senses and therefore the mind more likely to stay in focus. So the expectation is that anybody who loses the focus or does not keep it uppermost in the mind of why the purpose they're performing their austerities, charity, and penance is actually going to be subjected to great misery. It's just a given, because that's what the verse was dealing with, that the demigods deliberately increase the misery of a person when their focus goes from their mind not staying fixed on the purpose of the austerities. So maybe that simple cleanliness can go a long way to keeping the mind in the correct position of remembrance.
Sorry, maybe I didn't properly got it, but I will give some two examples from our previous acharyas.
Go.
Yes, now, since you took the example of cleanliness, it is quite natural that yes, cleanliness is an austerity. But let's say if somebody is so much focused on cleanliness, it is natural that he finds faults with others. He says, oh, he is not clean, just like Sripad Ramanujacharya, when he went to Jagannath Puri, he finds faults with the pujaris or pandas who are worshipping Lord Jagannath, saying that they are not worshipping Jagannath in a clean way. But Jagannath become upset by that, by Ramanujacharya judging his pujaris. Even Sanatan Goswami, when he was moving in Mathura, he saw that Chaube family who was serving Lord Madan Mohan in their house. The wife of Mr. Chaube was taking care of her kids also, as well as Madan Mohan also, and not following much standard about cleanliness. But whereas Sanatan Goswami saw that it is not good to serve the Lord in such a way, again Madan Mohan became upset. So of course it is the devotion that matters. But if the devotion is so matter, then why we have to focus more on austerities like Kartik austerities, Chaturmas austerities, and cleanliness austerities. So many austerities we perform in the practice of bhakti, and given so much attention and focus on austerities also. But if we see bhakti is independent of austerities also. So again, I wish to know that how much austerity a devotee should perform, or how much it is needed in a devotee's life.
Well, I mean, there's Vedic injunctions. So the main austerity, so to speak, is following the regulative principles, and as one progresses in spiritual life, then the austerities related to deity worship are natural. They're just part of one's dutiful performance of devotional acts towards the Supreme Lord, because there's a necessity for regulation. Devotional service has regulative principles that accompany it, and the particular injunctions are laid out very specifically. So one follows what is laid out. I mean, there's like a deity worship book which states, what mantra you can chant when you actually wake up, what mantra you're going to chant when you're offering the different items of worship to the deities. So these are purificatory processes that assist the mind to increase the attention and focus of all one's activities going towards the activity being placed at the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So it's not an unknown area, the amount of austerity. It's following the prescribed regulations that are there. And one is happy to do it. It's dutifully done. So to the idea that you have to measure if you're going overboard, which you brought up, an example, or somebody not doing an adequate amount in a home situation, that, like in the first example, moving into the area of what would be the word, being critical of other Vaishnavas is obviously a dangerous area. And that is, the predilection in one's character often. So, one has to be very conscious of one's nature and the dangers posed by one's nature. So to give way to weaknesses in one's nature, that isn't the result of necessarily the austerity being practiced, like in that case of cleanliness, but rather just giving way to weakness in one's nature, as opposed to being very vigilant. So so that would be an answer, that there's already existing injunctions and prescriptions for particularly Brahminical work, and then on the other hand, there's the duty one has to be very vigilant with how one, and monitor one's functioning of one's own mind and how one externalizes that particular functioning, particularly one's weak areas. There has to be monitoring. That's a response. Thank you. Sival.
I think the right question is not necessarily how much austerities. Just to add to the discussion, it's not how much austerities, but as you pointed out, and as the verse stated it in principle, is when we lose track of the purpose of whatever we do. I mean, Krishna doesn't necessarily, when he says, that whatever you do, whatever austerities you perform, whatever you eat, like that, is whatever, so it's not necessarily a specific amount, but it's whatever we do, it has to be for the purpose of pleasing the Lord. So then the question is not how much, but the question is, what is the required amount that allows me to easily be focused on pleasing the Lord. And as you say, there's prescribed austerities that we perform, and then those austerities are required for us to come to the stage of a spontaneous, pure devotional service, in which now the austerities are not required. But the austerities are required, and then I find, I was just going to comment on this, that I find, again, this series of verses are very, very, very insightful, because the purpose tell us that there's these two classes that are being highlighted here of people or living entities that fail to have that goal of acting for the pleasure of the Lord. And one is described that are the ones that are under the sway of the senses, and they're fully under the control of the demigods. And of course, they're being bombarded by all these miseries that is compared to an ocean. To be able to overcome that is an ocean. And then there's the ones who are free themselves from the influence of the senses. And it's explained that by their austerities, they're able to to overcome an ocean, to be able to navigate and overcome an ocean of sense gratification and be in the position. So this explaining is highlighting the position of the yogi, who by the austerities they overcome the influence of the senses and thus the influence of the demigods. But the fact is that because in both cases they don't worship the Supreme Lord, then the yogis who overcome the ocean of sense gratification becomes drowned, which is quite something. You drown in a puddle. You navigate an ocean and you drown in a puddle. It's quite a statement that, after all that effort, imagine to overcome an ocean, you ended drowning in a puddle. So, and the puddle is a puddle of anger. I was just remembering, the recent video that we saw, the life of Krishnamurti. We saw a video, we were watching a video on the life of this Krishnamurti, who is an impersonalist, a simple Brahmin boy who was picked up by a whole bunch of impersonalists and speculators, that was brought up to be a messiah, and his whole life have to go to the austerities of being separated from his family, from his space. He's plain. He was very austere to be displaced from his culture into a different culture. It was all very austere. And at the end, he was very resentful, to the whole thing. And he became an atheist, a very, just spouting atheistic philosophy. So it's quite something that people that are elevated through austerity ended being angry. So one question, but it's a very interesting subject, and we see that to what Sri Vallabha Prabhu said. If we, and sort of supporting the points that you made, if we lose the focus of the purpose of pleasing the Lord, sometimes as devotees we are doing these austerities. We have seen like that, devotees that are sort of uptight or angry, they become very easily angry, and usually it's when they perform so much austerities. Remember, we have a friend, devotee, wonderful devotee, but he was very, very heavy because he was very austere, and we were expecting everybody to have some similar level of austerity, and he become very critical, uptight, and upset, about other devotees, and it was very difficult for him. He couldn't sort of relax into the beauty of a service. So we have to be very careful. So
yeah, and that was the point brought up by Sri Vallabha Prabhu too, the danger that's there, that the performing austerities could lead to that space of being critical of others. So it's interesting because there it is, the persons are performing austerities that are of a devotional nature, so presumably their mind is fixed that this purpose of this austerity is for the Supreme Lord. So why in that case does the person take the route of becoming critical of others? So there is anger that comes from controlling the senses if one is forgetting the purpose, because when you keep uppermost in your mind that this is for the Supreme Lord and is done with that mood of openness and happiness, that this is for the Supreme Lord. I'm undertaking all these difficulties for pleasing the Supreme Lord. There's a great happiness that's there. So it definitely means that the mind is shifted focus, is forgetting the purpose of the austerity, if there's that kind of getting angry. Because one knows that, one could be doing things that are, relaxing, if one is still going through purification and finding it very austere to perform all the necessary steps in doing some act of sacrifice for the Supreme Lord. So through that process of purification, there may indeed be anger, but it definitely requires talking to the mind. Because as soon as one reminds oneself what is the purpose of what one is doing, lets the intelligence come in to control the mind, then the picture changes. It changes. I mean, I have the experience quite often that, if I think the mind is going astray into an unhappy space, as soon as I apply the intelligence of what is the actual situation, there's immediate happiness. The whole mood changes. Because, you have to actually monitor the mind and speak to the mind. You cannot let the mind, have full sway going in all sorts of directions. And particularly, it's recognized by Sri Balaban yourself that, there is this problem that comes in that the performance of austerity can lead to anger. And from this reading today, it's the demigods themselves were pointing out that, forgetting when the mind is not actually leading the way, that this act of sacrifice or austerity or penance or charity is for the purpose of pleasing the Supreme Lord, then they are increasing the misery. So it means the mind is even more likely to go down all kinds of unhappy paths. So there has to be conscious reminder to the mind if it seems to be going astray. The intelligence has to operate. You cannot just let the mind do its wandering. So a reminder to the mind is one's duty to make the austerity have the proper focus. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.